Happy New Year. It's January 2021. I want to take some time, a little bit longer video than usual. I want to share with you my one word for the year. This is my focus. The word is macro. Macro. I want to go macro with my faith in 2021. You see, I borrowed this word from the financial trading world. In the financial community, there are traders that trade. They may trade stocks or bonds or commodities. They might trade a specific area like soybean futures, something like that. But in the trading world, there are a different set of traders called macro traders. And these macro traders, they see everything. They see the stocks and bonds, commodities, currencies, complex derivative products. They see everything going on globally, and they're paying attention from a 30,000-foot view to the big macro trends. They will wait patiently, sometimes months and even years, for a macro trade to set up. And when they see everything aligning the way they want, they'll push their chips in the table and go for a big, giant macro trade. And that's what makes these traders macro traders. And one thing about these traders is they're very objective in their views, and they have deep convictions, okay, in what they believe. And they're not easily swayed by others, and they're not looking to sway others in their direction. They often operate anonymously. They're not on social media trying to get people to see their point of view. They're back studying what is it that they know and getting in line with a macro trade. Also, these macro traders are not over emotional. They don't get distracted by micro concerns. For example, politics. Last year, I saw a few interviews of a few of these macro traders, and this was during the 2020 heavy election, very, very, very contentious election season. And you couldn't even sense a bias or a leaning or a particular opinion from them about politics. They did not care. They didn't have an opinion, or at least they didn't let it show. Now, they were informed and they were paying attention because they always want to know how these micro developments affect their macro position, but they're not caught up in it. To them, their trade is so big and the payoff potential so great that even something as small as American politics doesn't get in their way. And so they're focused. They stay focused on macro, and they keep a distance from micro. Also, these macro traders, they're students of history. They understand not just the past 10, 20, 30 years, but they go back and study hundreds of years, even to ancient economies, because they understand cycles, big macro cycles, and they understand how human behavior over time. So that's a little bit about these macro traders. Now, I want to go macro with my faith in 2021. What does that mean? I want to confess that last year there was a lot of micro going on, and I got distracted at times over micro stuff, whether it was politics, whether it was COVID. There was plenty in the micro land last year, and already we're seeing in 2021 that it's continuing. It's not going away. 2021 is going to be a continuation of 2020 in terms of just loads of micro distractions for all of us. And so I want to get away from that. And so as I thought about macro, I thought, what is it that's the most 30,000-foot view, the most foundational, unchanging, non-compromising, non-negotiable view for me? It's this, that I know the Lord Jesus Christ and that Christ knows me. My name is in the Lamb's book of life. That's very foundational, very macro for me, very assuring for me. When I lay down at night, it helps me sleep when I've got all these micro things piling up in my world around me. So staying focused on that macro is something I should never let loose of. Secondly, part of my macro is that understanding that we live in a dying, decaying world. This world that we live in is dark, and it's getting increasingly dark. And it's a dying world. And that's, as we'll talk about, that's important for me to have in macro view. And then finally, like a trader, I'm setting up for a gigantic trade. Now, I'm not setting up for a financial trade like the traders are, but I am setting up for a life trade. I'm going to flip out of this earth into a new kingdom, the future heavens and earth with Jesus as king. I'm going to have a new role in that earth. And so I'm looking to make a big trade, and you should be too, because we're all going to trade in some way. So that's part of my macro, is that I know Christ, Christ knows me. We live in a dark, decaying world, and we're setting up for this big, gigantic trade in the future. That's my macro. So what about the micro? What about things like, let's just talk about one of them. Let's talk about politics, okay? Last year, there were times when if I saw a particular political figure on TV or on the news or on an internet story, and if this particular political person had views that threatened my worldview, my blood would start to boil. My heart rate would go up. I would get agitated and be frustrated at these people. And sometimes it wouldn't even be politicians. It would be news media. It might be certain news anchor people that when they project the news, of course, we know they never just project news. Nobody projects news. It's always baked opinions that are baked in news, or news baked in opinions, whatever. The point is, they could also get my blood to boil and get me agitated and get me caught up in the micro. And I have to step back and say, what am I getting upset about? Go back to my macro. I know the Lord Jesus Christ. Christ knows me. I'm setting up for this giant trade one day. What if these people don't know Christ? Christ doesn't know them. Their standing with God looks very, very different. Who am I to get all bent out of shape and frustrated because these people, are threatening my freedom or threatening my country or whatever, It's not really my country, is like we think it is. But the idea is that I have to step back and chill and say, that's micro. This is micro. Blue wave is micro. And you know what? I've got Christian brothers and sisters that would see politics completely different than I do. And so they may be saying, what do you mean blue wave? What's wrong with blue wave? We need blue wave. We don't need Donald Trump. And you see what I'm saying. It's micro. It's so micro. I'm getting out of it this year. I'm going macro with my faith. It doesn't mean that I don't care. It doesn't mean that I'm not paying attention. I'm going to have conversations with my family. We're going to talk about the Capitol protest. We're going to talk about all the last summer's protest in Democratic cities and do our comparisons and talk about what we believe is happening. And we're going to continue to be aware of what's going on in the world. But we're not going to get caught up in the micro. We're going to stay fixed on macro, because if we let micro become our macro, we're going to be frustrated all the time. And we're going to feel like the world is out to get us, and we're going to feel like that we have somehow this angry right to defend our turf. When the fact is, we live in a dying, decaying, dark world, and this is just kind of what I expect to happen. In fact, I'm expecting more of this. More political leadership going in a direction that conflicts with my worldview. That's micro, and I'm going to be prepared for it. Let's talk about something else. What about big tech censorship? There's another one. That's just really new. Big tech censorship comes along. All of a sudden, companies telling us who we can listen to, who we can't. I seem to think there are other threatening content online that should be censored. But tech companies think that something else should be censored. And so, that can get my blood to boil. And that can get me to say, they're threatening our freedoms. They are. But I've got to step back and say, this is micro too. This is also micro. And this is the type of stuff I expect to happen in a dark, dying, decaying world. Again, doesn't mean I'm just going to roll over and be ignorant and not have an opinion. I can have an opinion, but I've got to keep it like the macro traders. They're studying, they pay attention, they see what's happening. How does what's happening on the ground affect my macro position? And we got to come at it from a macro. That's what I want to do when I talk to my family about these things. Because we're talking about big tech censorship, and we're talking about Amazon, and we're talking about Twitter, and we're talking about Facebook and YouTube, and it's very hard to get away from big tech, okay? But it's also micro. It's very micro. COVID-19, micro. Gigantic oxymoron, but it's a big micro in that we spent a lot of time last year wrapped up in division and conflict over a micro matter. Yeah, the virus is real, no doubt about it. I'm not discounting the virus. It is a great killer, but I can't solve it. I've had a lot of frustration over how I think Christians should respond to coronavirus, and I've got very fond brothers and sisters that can sit on the other side of the table and say, Jeff, we should see it this way, and Jeff, you're being irresponsible. And at the end of the day, it's micro. But here's what is macro about the virus, and that is that these are the types of things that happen in a dark, dying, decaying world. Viruses, pandemics. Going back to the Old Testament, God would send plagues to the Israelites to punish them. And in Leviticus, he actually says, I'll send them to frustrate you, because frustration was his punishment. And so I'm not suggesting that God sent COVID-19 as a punishment. I'm just saying that there is a precedence in history of God using plagues to get people's attention. And this global pandemic has the whole world's attention. Everyone is stressed globally. Governments are stressed. Healthcare systems are stressed. Economies are stressed. Everyone is frustrated. Christians are frustrated with one another. It's very complicated. So I'm going to keep the micro in the micro lane and not get entangled in a lot of the disputes and opinions about masks, technology, and virus spreading and vaccines. And I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to be aware. But I've got to stay macro and say, you know what's going on? This is part of a world going dark, a world that is decaying, a world that is dying. There's a pandemic here. There's been plagues in the past in history. There are some plagues projected in God's prophecy in the future. Here we are. This is very interesting. Let's pay attention. Macro, macro. You see what I'm saying? Just a little less emotional energy in the micro lane. More seeing things from God's perspective in the macro lane. Here are 4 things that I'm going to do this year. I'm encouraging people to do as well. Number 1, you've heard it from me. If you follow me for any length of time, you know how passionate I am about family Bible engagement. In 2021, another new year, we're going to get in the Word. It's the only way we can stay macro is to be in the Bible. The macro, like the macro traders, macro faith is always learning the history of God. What has God been doing from the beginning? And what has he been doing along the way? What prophecies have been fulfilled? Those prophecies give us confidence in the ones that have not yet been fulfilled. And so we're always waiting and watching and seeing things from a macro perspective. Be in the Word of God. If you're not, you will make your micro stuff your macro, and you'll be frustrated. Number 2, get prepared financially. And I'm not talking about storing water or having gold coins or silver coins for some type of, Earth Day meltdown. That's not my message. I'm just talking about do the things financially that we should do in a non-pandemic world, but especially do them in a pandemic world where the world is stressed. Things like getting out of debt, having no consumer debt. My wife and I have encouraged that for many, many years, and that continues to be my message. Get completely debt-free. Start with the debt you have, slow elimination, work toward total elimination. Get out of debt. You'll feel better for it. Whether we have a pandemic world or not, it's a great way to live. 2, part of this number 2, I'm encouraging people to sell stuff, to take this time to look around in your life and look at the micro things that are distracting you. And maybe they're extra cars in your driveway, maybe they're toys, maybe there's stuff in your garage, maybe there's stuff in your attic. This is a good time to downsize and sell stuff, raise cash, do something good with it. I heard a story over Christmas of a family that found they discovered, or maybe they knew it, but they brought out all these little Beanie Babies, original Beanie Baby dolls that apparently are originals and have, this great value. And I'm sitting here thinking, sell that stuff. Why are we collecting things in a world like this, in a dark, dying, decaying world? And I'm not against having, some collectibles, but you evaluate for yourself. Is this a time to take some of the things you're holding on to and sell them at a time when they have value? If your home is causing you financial stress or maintenance stress, maybe it's a good time to sell your house. That's a big, big selling idea, but this might be the time to do it while the market is still friendly, because it may not always be this friendly to sell your home. Number 3, another financial idea, to continue to give. Pay attention to your giving, giving to God. Continue to give faithfully, give generously. Jesus says in Matthew 6:19-21, store up for yourself treasure in heaven, where rust and moth do not destroy, thieves do not break in and steal. Think about that big trade. A macro trader is going to trade into another world, and the things you give, what you give to God, goes on your permanent balance sheet. It's part of your eternal assets, giving to the Lord. When the pandemic was in full swing in March and the markets dropped a third of their value, I remember seeing my financial statements and just feeling this sick feeling in my stomach of the money that had been lost so quickly. But I was quickly reminded of my eternal assets. This is the giving that my wife and I have been doing for the past 25 years. And years ago, I heard someone encourage Christians, say, you should keep track of your giving every year and kind of be aware of that number, because that's your eternal investment. And it's kind of a comforting thing. It just kind of makes you go, oh, yeah, my wealth isn't all tied up to what I have here on earth. I've made some trades, and I'm trading to this future life in this future kingdom, storing up treasure in heaven. And so what I've discovered is, no matter how good or bad you feel about your financial position, you might feel well prepared, you might feel ill prepared financially today. But no matter how you feel, when you give, you feel better. So if you have a history of giving, you feel better about your financial position, whatever that is. It's just an interesting dynamic that giving gives us this sense of peace and comfort. So during the pandemic world that we're in, a dark, dying, decaying world, giving is a good thing. Make sure you're giving faithfully to the Lord. And then finally, number 4, this is what I call having a long-term earthly perspective, which is kind of the opposite of what I've been describing. But have a long-term view here on earth, that for this reason, 5, 10, 20, 30 years. Often when we talk in Christian church speak, we talk about, the rapture and short-term view and being ready. And I always recommend we have a be ready posture. But what I mean by long-term is recognizing that we're in this dark, dying, decaying world. And it is getting darker and darker every year. 2022 will be darker than 2021. 2021 will be darker than 2020. That's just part of my macro. That's how I see the world. And so I know that my children and my grandchildren, I don't have grandchildren, but Lord willing, if we're here long enough, I might have grandchildren, and they're going to be in a world that is growing increasingly dark and increasingly difficult to see light, to see truth. And they've got to know the macro. I want my children and grandchildren in the future generations to know Daddy's macro, that they know Jesus Christ, that Christ knows them, that they're in the Lamb's book of life, and that they know they're in a dark, dying, decaying world, and that they're seeking truth because they're setting up for this big, giant trade. I think that macro is getting harder and harder for families to see because the world is lying to us more and more. And so my long-term view on earth, 5, 10, 20 years, it has me motivated like a macro trader to build a legacy that helps my family walk with God and sets up a legacy so that future Andersons can hang on to this macro Christian view that I've been talking about. Let's go macro in 2021, macro faith together. I'll have more videos along the way this year to give you my thoughts and reflections as I try to get out of the micro and go macro with my faith. Again, Happy New Year.